The world can be a pretty dark and depressing place, but luckily the bright ray of sunshine that is the video game industry always has a world for you to jump into instead. In fact, some of the best games ever transport players to colourful universes where good people always come out on top, and make the world a better place for everyone in the process. However, there's no denying that us humans are a bitter and cynical lot, especially those of us who have to live under the tyrannical thumb of one Jules Gill, and so we're always suspicious of a happy ending, constantly searching for a notable tear that can rip away at the saccharine facade and reveal the darkness underneath. Indeed, it's also always to read new perspectives on some of our favourite stories, especially when they turn simple tales of good versus evil into tragic stories of loss and failure. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 fan theories that make your favourite video games super depressing. Number 10. The companion cubes in Portal contain real human people. A recurring joke throughout Portal comes from the game's villain GLaDOS, hinting that your faithful companion cube might actually be alive, warning you to ignore it if it starts talking to you, and even mocking you by suggesting it was trying to say "I love you" when you destroyed it. One theory, however, thinks there might actually be some truth to what the villain was saying. See, GLaDOS has run her tests on numerous subjects before you enter the picture, and yet we never see any bodies. Fans have argued that's because GLaDOS has incorporated them into the tests themselves, placing them into the cube so that they would be unwittingly disposed of in the incinerator by the next subject. Even worse, the horrifying implication is that these unlucky souls might not necessarily be dead. If a subject breaks their leg, for instance, and is unable to continue, GLaDOS would still dispose of them, cramming them into these tiny boxes. The real reason, then, that she warns you not to pay attention to any of the voices coming from the cube isn't because she's playing a joke on you, but because she doesn't want you catching on that there's a real person trapped inside. A person who you then kill. Number 9. EARTHBOUND is about abortion. The cult classic RPG EARTHBOUND ends with hero Ness and his friends travelling back in time to defeat the evil alien Gigas before his ascent to power. However, some people have found a darker meaning to the game's final boss fight. One popular theory is that Ness actually kills Gigas as a fetus, and there's some surprisingly strong visual evidence to back it up. While Gigas himself seems like a swirling mass of energy in the final fight, if you trace the blackness surrounding him, it looks suspiciously like an ultrasound image of an unborn baby. Adding to that, to fight Gigas, you have to enter the Devil's Machine, which holds him, a machine which bears more than a passing resemblance to a woman's cervix. It would be a dark addition to such a bright game, but not entirely out of place. The game's creator said in an interview that he based the final boss fight on a traumatic childhood experience, in which he snuck into a movie and thought that he saw a rape scene, with these sexual themes making their way into his work. It would also go a long way to explain why the game's Japanese title is, wait for it, Mother. Number 8. Luigi killed himself in Luigi's Mansion. Despite being as light-hearted as you'd expect an entry in the Mario franchise to be, Luigi's Mansion might be the closest the Mario series has ever come to a true horror game, especially once you reach the attic. Entering the top of the house for the first time, a flash of lightning passes by the window, casting Luigi's shadow on the opposite wall. However, the shadow seems to be hovering slightly above the ground. A lot of people just shrugged it off as a glitch, but those are the kind of fools who don't spend hours spinning elaborate stories out of tiny video game details. Because the rest of us know the truth, it's clearly evidence that the real Luigi hanged himself in the attic, and the character we're playing as is actually a ghost. So what pushed Luigi over the edge in the first place? The fear of living inside a haunted mansion? The stress of always playing second fiddle to Mario? Or was it the inescapable memory of the Super Mario Bros. Movie? Sadly, we may never know. Number 7. Squall dies in Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII is slightly notorious for its non-stop plot twists, perhaps most infamously the one that all the characters were unknowingly raised in the same orphanage. However, one theory explains that there's actually a good reason for this seemingly random detail. About halfway through the game, main character Squall is impaled with an ice shard and plummets from a platform. In the next scene though, he wakes up at a hospital, completely uninjured. The Squall's dead theory hypothesizes that Squall's injury were actually fatal, and the rest of the game is just his dying dream. It explains why it's at this point that a lot of plot twists suddenly seem to come out of nowhere. These huge leaps of logic are meant to showcase that Squall's mind is trying to connect everything together, like giving everyone he knows the same backstory, just to give himself a sense of resolution before he dies. It also gives a terrifyingly plausible explanation for the game's ending, a strange sequence in which we see through Squall's eyes as everything begins to blur and fade away. That's because it's the last thing he imagines as he succumbs to his wounds, fading out of consciousness. Number 6. The poignant backstory of the Super Smash Bros. Series. It can often get lost in the sea of Fox vs. Fox matches, but the Super Smash Bros. Series actually has a story. The games are a metaphor for a child, represented by a character called Master Hand, playing with their toys. However, some fans have also interpreted it to be about series creator Masahiro Sakurai. Sakurai is presented by Master Hand, a Nintendo fan given free reign to play in the toy box of all his favourite characters. However, Sakurai has also been very public about his frustration with being forced to keep making more and more of these repetitive games. This is represented in the releases themselves by Crazy Hand, Master Hand's more destructive twin who wants to get rid of everything and move on to something new. Things get even more depressing in Super Smash Bros. Brawl with the introduction of Taboo, the being controlling Master Hand. Some have interpreted the character as a metaphor for Nintendo and how they keep Sakurai on a leash, constricting his creativity by forcing him to pump out these games. The depressing end to the story, at least for now, is Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U and 3DS. After beating Master Hand, he turns into the Master Core and stops fighting altogether, symbolizing Sakurai resigning himself to a life of making a series he no longer cares about. Number 5. BRAID is about the nuclear bomb. For a seemingly whimsical platformer, BRAID makes a weird amount of references to the atomic bomb. A popular interpretation of all these Easter eggs, though, is that they hint towards main protagonist Tim being a scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project, with the princess he's obsessed with representing the A-bomb, and the game's entire mechanic of solving puzzles by rewinding time indicating that Tim regrets his work on the invention. With that in mind, it's theorized that the entire game is actually just a metaphor for his desire to stop his past self from ever taking part in the project. Even more strong evidence includes the title screen showing a city on fire and a hidden reference to Kenneth Bainbridge's famous quote upon the game's completion, "Now we are all sons of bitches." The most compelling piece of evidence, though, comes from after completing the Herculean task of getting all 7 hidden stars. Acquiring all of these means it's actually possible to catch up with the princess in the final level. However, when you touch her, she begins to flash and you'll hear the sound of a bomb detonating. The subtext quickly becomes the actual text. Number 4. The Great Pokemon War. The weird logic of the Pokemon universe and the rather threadbare story provided by the games has led to a whole smorgasbord of dark theories, but the granddaddy of them all is the so-called Great Pokemon War. The basis for the theory comes from the original games Red and Blue, or Red and Green if you're going to be that guy, and the electric-type gym leader Lieutenant Surge. Obviously a member of some kind of army, Surge cryptically mentions how electric Pokemon saved him during the war. This has led to some fans speculating that the games take place in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic worldwide conflict. This line of thinking actually explains a lot about the Pokemon's world, though. Everyone is so obsessed with battles between these fantastical stamps because they've grown up in a world where everyone of a certain age gets drafted, and so knowing how to fight is essential. Also, with a lot of the adults killed in action, explaining why there's a distinct lack of adult NPCs, children have had to step up to take on more responsibility, doing things such as running gyms. Number 3. Everything about Limbo. Limbo gives next to nothing away about its story, but one of the most commonly accepted theories is that it's actually about the realm between heaven and hell. The theory states that Limbo's nameless protagonist is actually dead, and the game is about him traversing purgatory to find his dead sister. A major clue that this is true can be found on the title screen, which shows the same spot where the boy eventually does find his sister later in the game, but without either character, and 2 groups of flies swarming over where they both were, possibly drawn to their decaying corpses. Theories range as to how they died, from a car accident to them falling from the treehouse seen on the title screen. But an even darker take is that the boy either killed or is trying to kill his sister, explaining why all of the other inhabitants either run away from him or try to stop him. However, the biggest evidence that the boy is up to no good is the way he kills the spider, slowly tearing off each of its legs to make sure it suffers. Number 2. Animal Crossing is a cult. On the surface, you can't find a game more innocent than Animal Crossing, but did you know there's a good chance that the entire series is about being held hostage as part of a weird cult? Just think about it for a second. You're brought here one day, shown a house that's been assigned to you, and immediately thrown into a life working to pay off a debt you never asked for. What happens when you do pay off that debt, though? Well, your house gets an unwanted extension, and you're forced to pay off an even bigger debt. When put like that, it makes perfect sense that it's all the work of a cult, forcing you into an endless cycle of work. Other things that ratchet up the game's creepiness factor include the fact that no one else in the village is human, but they seem to be fully aware of what humans are. The suggestion is that you're not the first person to visit Animal Crossing, but no other human is ever seen or mentioned. Number 1. Metal Gear Solid 5's missing ending is the real phantom pain. While Metal Gear Solid 5 gained critical acclaim upon its release, the sequel, which promised to bridge the gap between the series' Big Bros prequel entries and the later Solid Snake saga, ended up disappointing fans thanks to a rushed and arguably unfinished ending. After a strong first act, the game's second chapter was full of repeated missions and a fractured storyline that ended with an out-of-nowhere twist. Fans left the game with the feeling that something was missing, a worry which was seemingly confirmed when unfinished missions, cutscenes, and an entire third chapter were revealed online. However, instead of this missing content being put down to the title's extremely troubled development, fans questioned whether Kojima Productions were trying to instill their own phantom pain in players, aiming to make them feel the loss of a limb just like Venom Snake himself. It kinda makes sense when you think about it. The title's second half is all about unraveling everything that came before it, taking away Quiet as a companion, having Eli steal the Metal Gear, and crushing your dreams of child soldier Paz still being alive. All of this, combined with an ending that just seemed to happen, and the refusal to answer the questions posed by the trailers, added to a collective phantom pain that everyone who played MGS5 had to deal with. So that's our list. If there are any deliciously dark fan theories you've come across that I've missed here, feel free to let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for even more lists like this every single day. I've been Josh, and after all of these, I think I'm gonna have a cry.